Hey guys, imagine a monarch so grand his courtiers wore mirrors on their shoes just to catch a glimpse of his brilliance, only to discover, centuries later, that the Sun King himself had literally rotted in his golden chambers. Intrigued? You should be. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. Louis XIV was the very embodiment of absolute monarchy. From the moment he ascended to the throne at the tender age of 4, he was groomed to radiate unwavering authority. By the time he reached adulthood, he'd adopted an identity that would echo through history: the Sun King, source of light and life for a mighty France. His court shimmered with opulence. His rule stretched for an astonishing 72 years, the longest in European history. But behind the grandeur lay a hidden horror, an obsession with ritualized spectacle that masked a body ravaged by time, disease, and ultimately decay. By the spring of 1715, at age 76, Louis' once regal figure had dwindled. His gait was laborious, supported by uneasy servants. His face, once the epitome of noble refinement, sagged under the weight of years and successive bouts of gout. Yet each morning he continued his legendary ritual. As dawn's first rays pierced the windows of Versailles, courtiers assembled in hushed reverence to witness the king rise from his bed. This lever ceremony, as it was known, transformed a simple act of waking into statecraft, reinforcing his image as the axis around which the world turned. But on April 1st, 1715, a date later whispered with ominous irony, Louis' health took a dramatic turn. It began with a petit flux de ventre, what doctors delicately described as diarrhea. In an age when the causes of such ailments ranged from spoiled meat to moral turpitude, little alarm bells rang. Yet when the king asked for a simple chicken broth that evening and refused to eat it, the gravity of his condition became undeniable. Over the next days, physicians descended on Versailles in unprecedented numbers. They diagnosed Louis with intestinal obstruction and later gangrene of the bowels, a diagnosis so grim that his courtiers dared not speak the word death. Instead, they whispered of la maladie de Louis in corridors lined with gilt and marble, where every echo carried dread. Treatments were archaic and brutal, repeated bleedings to balance the humors, leeches applied to his legs, and enemas administered by trembling pages. As the disease tightened its grip, Louis' mind too began to fray. He proclaimed himself in perfect health, insisting on performing his morning lever, even as his attendants caught him when he collapsed. To maintain appearances, his doctors propped him in regal crimson draperies, lit candles around his bed, and had the trumpets announce his awakening each day. This gruesome theater continued for weeks, the line between regal pageantry and tragic farce blurring with every forced breath. It wasn't until mid-May, more than a month after his first symptoms, that the true horror was revealed. The gangrene had progressed to putrefaction. Physicians, summoned with trembling hands, undertook an examination that even they would later describe in hushed tones as execrable. When they stripped back the linens, they found the flesh around his wound darkened, oozing a fetid discharge that overwhelmed the scented air of Versailles. The courtiers, ever anxious to uphold dignity, insisted on perfumed gloves, yet many recoiled, their faces masked, tears of fear and pity shining in their eyes. Louis, meanwhile, remained regal to the last. Though racked by pain, he took time to attend to affairs of state, signing decrees in his own blood during delirious moments and offering words of counsel to his grandson and heir, the future Louis XV. He made provisions for his beloved legitimized son, the Duc du Maine, and arranged for the continuation of projects that had shaped his reign: the final expansions of Versailles, the establishment of academies, and treaties to secure France's prominence in Europe. But as his strength drained, so did the veneer of his invincibility. On the night of September 1st, 1715, the sunlight of the French crown flickered for the last time. Louis summoned his confessor, received the sacraments, and, his voice quavering with a humility rarely seen in life, asked forgiveness for any injudicious acts he had committed as king. Then, with his final breath, a kingdom changed forever. What happened next was equally chilling. In anticipation of his death, court physicians and royal anatomists carefully prepared to embalm the body, though true preservation techniques were rudimentary at best. Under Caroline lemongrass-scented cloths, they filled his torso with aromatic spices, frankincense, myrrh, cinnamon, and cloves. Oil of cedar was poured into cavities where bile and blood had pooled, all in a bid to mask the stench of decay. Yet nature had other plans. Within hours, the body's chemical march toward corrosion overwhelmed the crude preservatives. The spices, though fragrant, could not halt the proliferation of bacteria already at work. His internal organs, removed and placed in lead-lined containers, known as abscissaria, began to liquefy grotesquely. Anatomists would later note how the king's liver had assumed a putrid blackness, and his intestines had slumped into a shapeless, fetid mass. The royal undertakers, faced with the inevitable, improvised a macabre solution. They packed his coffin with pitch-soaked oak shavings to absorb the fluids and chase away the worst odors. They sealed it and placed it within 3 successive coffins, an inner oak casket, a lead shell, and a final ebony container adorned with gilded fleur-de-lis. Then came the state funeral, a procession of grandeur so immense that Paris itself seemed cloaked in mourning velvet. Torches blazed along the route, and tens of thousands lined the streets, craning their necks to catch sight of their late sovereign one final time. By day, the coffin rested in the Cathedral of Saint-Denis, his ancestors' vault, surrounded by candles and the echo of requiem chants. Yet even there, the smell seeped through the hushed aisles, an uncanny reminder that death pays no heed to dynastic splendor. Meanwhile, the official autopsy report, sealed under royal decree, went missing shortly after burial, giving birth to rumors that it described horrors too scandalous for polite society. Courtiers whispered of Louis's body having turned into a swamp of corruption, of maggots wriggling beneath his skin, and of a smell that sickened the Archduke of Austria, an esteemed guest at the funeral. Others claimed that the embalmers had been forced to wrap his bones in dozens of yards of linen to contain the stench when they later erected his tomb. Such stories fueled the myth of a rotting monarch, a cautionary tale whispered in salons and taverns alike, that no amount of wealth or power could shield one from the inevitability of decay. Artists took up the theme, painting the transience of earthly glory with skulls, wilting flowers, and gilded crowns perched atop bones. Philosophers and moralists invoked Louis's fate to preach about humility before God and the vanity of human ambition. But beyond the moralizing, the physical reality of Louis XIV's post-mortem decay had broader repercussions. It spurred advances in anatomical science, as students and physicians pored over reports of his gangrenous tissues in hopes of understanding infection and decomposition. French surgeons began to refine preservation methods, experimenting with stronger antiseptics and exploring the use of alcohol-based lacquers. The tragedy of the Sun King became, in a grim twist, a catalyst for medical progress. Yet, for all its impact on science, the tale remained deeply personal to the people of France. For over 7 decades, Louis had been their sovereign, their patron of the arts, their warmonger, and their source of stability. To imagine him laid low by something as primal as putrefaction was to reconcile the awe-inspiring grandeur of his reign with the unsettling truth of mortality. The streets of Paris, once bedecked in fêtes and fireworks in his honor, would long thereafter whisper of that dark April when the Sun King rotted alive. As we peel back the layers of this bizarre chapter in royal history, it's tempting to ask, was there anything the great Louis XIV could have done to delay his own decay? Or was it merely the final act of a drama written by time itself? In the next segment, we'll delve deeper into the cultural reverberations of his grotesque demise, explore first-hand accounts from horrified courtiers, and uncover how the myth of the rotting king shaped the destiny of a nation hurtling toward revolution. Stay tuned, because the story of Louis XIV's final days is only just beginning. Hey guys, welcome back to our journey into the curious final chapter of the Sun King. If you haven't already, make sure you caught part 1 where we left Louis XIV's body enshrouded in oak, lead, and ebony, yet still betraying him with its stench. Today, in part 2, we're plunging deeper into the shockwaves that rippled through Versailles and Paris, the eyewitness accounts that read like Gothic horror, and the strange ways a rotting monarch reshaped medicine, art, and politics forever. A court in panic. As news of Louis's putrefaction spread, Versailles transformed from the glittering jewel of Europe into a house of dread. Courtiers who had once jockeyed for the king's favor now tiptoed around his corpse with citron-scented gloves, whispering nervous prayers. Imagine Madame de Maintenon, his closest confidant, stepping into his chamber only to recoil at the sight of blackened flesh pressing against embroidered crimson sheets. The king's valet, who'd polished his boots every morning, is said to have fainted on the spot, his waxed mustache stained by terror rather than powder. Reports tell of lady-in-waiting Marie-Thérèse, who stood vigil at the foot of the coffin, clutching a prayer book so tightly her knuckles whitened. Even she admitted later that the perfume of sandalwood taped to her nostrils barely masked the overpowering aroma of decay. In whispered memoirs, smuggled out of Versailles in envelopes stained with candle wax, courtiers spoke of rats that followed the funeral procession, drawn by the scent of human rot, and of torches guttering as though repelled by some invisible miasma. Eyewitness testimonies? Horror and reverence. One of the most vivid accounts comes from Jean Petit, a young squire tasked with guarding the king's severed entrails, those liquefied organs placed in the lead abscissaria. In a letter to his sister, he confessed he could not bear to look at the glass jars, for within them churned a black ocean of foulness. By candlelight, he imagined shapes moving beneath the surface. They writhed like serpents, he wrote, and I feared they would rise and envelop me in their slime. Then there's the diary of Abbé Jérôme d'Aubignac, a priest who administered last rites to Louis XIV's corpse each night for a fortnight. His entries read like a fever dream. He describes how the king's lips, though sealed, still exuded a greenish discharge, and how the chest cavity exhaled a breath that made him gag. Yet in these same pages, the abbé records his awe. Even in death, his face retained a trace of majesty. He wrote, "Between those rotting cheeks lay the echo of 1,000 ceremonies. Medical ramifications, from embalming to early antisepsis, the grotesque failure of the traditional embalming spices triggered a flurry of experimentation. University of Paris anatomy professors, once content to dissect condemned criminals, now clamored for detailed reports on royal decay. They dissected animal cadavers, applying stronger concentrations of alcohol and experimenting with sulfur-based compounds to halt bacterial growth. A handful of forward-thinking surgeons began to suspect that it wasn't evil spirits causing putrefaction, but microscopic seeds of corruption, centuries ahead of Pasteur's discoveries. At Chaillot Hospital, a young surgeon named Claude François Lachapelle devised a rudimentary antiseptic wash of vinegar and alum, inspired by reading reports of the king's festering bowels. Though crude and painful, this wash reduced post-operative infections in wounded soldiers. In letters to colleagues, Lachapelle praised Louis's misfortune as a terrible blessing, noting that without it, France's surgeons might have remained mired in the humoral theory for decades. Artistic aftershocks. The memento mori revival painters and sculptors across France seized on the theme of mortality. The Salon of 1716, held just months after the funeral, showcased still lifes of rotting fruit, skulls half covered by sun-bleached crowns, and portraits of anonymous nobles gazing at hourglasses. In one striking oil on canvas, an allegorical France cradled the Sun King's skull like a lover mourning a spouse, her tears glistening on ivory bone. Carvers working on the chapel of Saint-Denis introduced new motifs, charred vines entwined around royal coat of arms, and angels handling shrouds that peeled back to reveal skeletal forms beneath. Even fashion caught the trend. Lace collars were trimmed with embroidered skulls, and mourning attire included capes printed with memento mori symbols. The public, long accustomed to pomp and ceremony, now found beauty in the macabre. Death came to be seen not merely as an ending, but as a dramatic, almost theatrical curtain call. Political reverberations. Succession and intrigue. Behind the scenes, the rotting corpse sowed seeds of political upheaval. Louis had meticulously named his grandson Philippe d'Orléans as a regent for the child king Louis XV, but rumors circulated that the Duc du Maine, his legitimized son, had bribed embalmers to exaggerate his father's decay and thus discredit the Orléans faction. Pamphlets accusing the Duke of poisoning the king appeared overnight in Paris's Latin Quarter, fueling riots that required the permanent stationing of royal musketeers to patrol the streets. Meanwhile, foreign courts watched with a voyeuristic glee. In London, the anti-French press splashed grotesque cartoons on broadsheets, caricatures of Louis XIV's corpse dancing with death, both portraits captioned "The King and His Wages." Habsburg diplomats whispered in Vienna salons that France, its monarch debased to a carcass, had truly lost its divine favor. This perception would embolden Louis XV to pursue more aggressive policies and pave the way, decades later, for the revolutionary fervor that toppled the very idea of monarchy. Philosophical ripples, from vanity to vulnerability, intellectuals seized upon the king's demise as proof of humanity's ultimate equality. Montesquieu, in private correspondence, argued that if the mightiest monarch could be humbled by a bacterial infection, then no earthly power was inviolable. Voltaire penned satirical essays imagining Louis XIV bargaining with the devil in the afterlife, only to find the Prince of Darkness repulsed by the stench. Even church sermons shifted. Preachers stopped quoting Psalm 72, "He shall live, and to him shall be given of the gold of Sheba," and instead leaned into Psalm 90, "Teach us to number our days, that we may apply our hearts unto wisdom." This philosophical pivot had concrete effects. French nobles, once believing themselves above common ailments, began to take personal hygiene more seriously, bathing more often and avoiding poorly ventilated apartments. The idea that disease was not a moral punishment but a biological risk began to take hold, subtly undermining the notion of divine right. Legends and myths, the rotting king in folklore. Within a decade of Louis's death, folk tales had woven the rotting monarch into the fabric of popular culture. In the countryside, parents whispered to unruly children, "Behave, or the rotting king will come for you," evoking shudders of fear. Traveling puppet shows staged the March of the Three Coffins, featuring actors in layered caskets emerging one by one to confront the audience with the inevitability of death and the folly of earthly power. Even the Paris catacombs, where bones of the poor were interred, gained a curious nickname, the Sun King's Shadow. Tour guides told tourists that on moonless nights you could hear the distant echo of trumpet fanfares, an oral hallucination born of too much wine and too many memento mori paintings. A court in panic. As news of Louis's putrefaction spread, Versailles transformed from the glittering jewel of Europe into a house of dread. Courtiers who had once jockeyed for the king's favor now tiptoed around his corpse with citron-scented gloves, whispering nervous prayers. Imagine Madame de Maintenon, his closest confidant, stepping into his chamber only to recoil at the sight of blackened flesh pressing against embroidered crimson sheets. The king's valet, who'd polished his boots every morning, is said to have fainted on the spot, his waxed mustache stained by terror rather than powder. Reports tell of lady-in-waiting Marie-Thérèse, who stood vigil at the foot of the coffin, clutching a prayer book so tightly her knuckles whitened. Even she admitted later that the perfume of sandalwood taped to her nostrils barely masked the overpowering aroma of decay. In whispered memoirs, smuggled out of Versailles in envelopes stained with candle wax, courtiers spoke of rats that followed the funeral procession, drawn by the scent of human rot, and of torches guttering as though repelled by some invisible miasma. Eyewitness testimonies, horror and reverence. One of the most vivid accounts comes from Jean Petit, a young squire tasked with guarding the king's severed entrails, those liquefied organs placed in the lead abscissaria. In a letter to his sister, he confessed he could not bear to look at the glass jars, for within them churned a black ocean of foulness. By candlelight, he imagined shapes moving beneath the surface. "They writhed like serpents," he wrote, "and I feared they would rise and envelop me in their slime." Then there's the diary of Abbé Jérôme d'Aubignac, a priest who administered last rites to Louis XIV's corpse each night for a fortnight. His entries read like a fever dream. He describes how the king's lips, though sealed, still exuded a greenish discharge, and how the chest cavity exhaled a breath that made him gag. Yet in these same pages, the abbé records his awe. Even in death, his face retained a trace of majesty. He wrote, "Between those rotting cheeks lay the echo of 1,000 ceremonies, medical ramifications, from embalming to early antisepsis. The grotesque failure of the traditional embalming spices triggered a flurry of experimentation. University of Paris anatomy professors, once content to dissect condemned criminals, now clamored for detailed reports on royal decay. They dissected animal cadavers, applying stronger concentrations of alcohol and experimenting with sulfur-based compounds to halt bacterial growth. A handful of forward-thinking surgeons began to suspect that it wasn't evil spirits causing putrefaction, but microscopic seeds of corruption, centuries ahead of Pasteur's discoveries. At Chaillot Hospital, a young surgeon named Claude François Lachapelle devised a rudimentary antiseptic wash of vinegar and alum, inspired by reading reports of the king's festering bowels. Though crude and painful, this wash reduced post-operative infections in wounded soldiers. In letters to colleagues, Lachapelle praised Louis's misfortune as a terrible blessing, noting that without it, France's surgeons might have remained mired in the humoral theory for decades. Artistic aftershocks. The memento mori revival painters and sculptors across France seized on the theme of mortality. The Salon of 1716, held just months after the funeral, showcased still lifes of rotting fruit, skulls half covered by sun-bleached crowns, and portraits of anonymous nobles gazing at hourglasses. In one striking oil on canvas, an allegorical France cradled the Sun King's skull like a lover mourning a spouse, her tears glistening on ivory bone. Carvers working on the chapel of Saint-Denis introduced new motifs, charred vines entwined around royal coat of arms, and angels handling shrouds that peeled back to reveal skeletal forms beneath. Even fashion caught the trend. Lace collars were trimmed with embroidered skulls, and mourning attire included capes printed with memento mori symbols. The public, long accustomed to pomp and ceremony, now found beauty in the macabre. Death came to be seen not merely as an ending, but as a dramatic, almost theatrical curtain call. Political reverberations, succession, and intrigue. Behind the scenes, the rotting corpse sowed seeds of political upheaval. Louis had meticulously named his grandson Philippe d'Orléans as regent for the child king Louis XV, but rumors circulated that the Duc de Maine, his legitimized son, had bribed embalmers to exaggerate his father's decay and thus discredit the Orléans faction. Pamphlets accusing the Duke of poisoning the king appeared overnight in Paris's Latin Quarter, fueling riots that required the permanent stationing of royal musketeers to patrol the streets. Meanwhile, foreign courts watched with a voyeuristic glee. In London, the anti-French press splashed grotesque cartoons on broadsheets, caricatures of Louis XIV's corpse dancing with death, both portraits captioned, "The King and His Wages." Habsburg diplomats whispered in Vienna salons that France, its monarch debased to a carcass, had truly lost its divine favor. This perception would embolden Louis XV to pursue more aggressive policies, and pave the way, decades later, for the revolutionary fervor that toppled the very idea of monarchy. Philosophical ripples, from vanity to vulnerability, intellectuals seized upon the king's demise as proof of humanity's ultimate equality. Montesquieu, in private correspondence, argued that if the mightiest monarch could be humbled by a bacterial infection, then no earthly power was inviolable. Voltaire penned satirical essays imagining Louis XIV bargaining with the devil in the afterlife, only to find the Prince of Darkness repulsed by the stench. Even church sermons shifted. Preachers stopped quoting Psalm 72, "He shall live, and to him shall be given of the gold of Sheba," and instead leaned into Psalm 90, "Teach us to number our days, that we may apply our hearts unto wisdom." This philosophical pivot had concrete effects. French nobles, once believing themselves above common ailments, began to take personal hygiene more seriously, bathing more often and avoiding poorly ventilated apartments. The idea that disease was not a moral punishment but a biological risk began to take hold, subtly undermining the notion of divine right. Legends and myths, the rotting king and folklore. Within a decade of Louis's death, folk tales had woven the rotting monarch into the fabric of popular culture. In the countryside, parents whispered to unruly children, "Behave, or the rotting king will come for you," evoking shudders of fear. Traveling puppet shows staged The March of the Three Coffins, featuring actors in layered caskets emerging one by one to confront the audience with the inevitability of death and the folly of earthly power. Even the Paris catacombs, where bones of the poor were interred, gained a curious nickname, the Sun King's Shadow. Tour guides told tourists that on moonless nights you could hear the distant echo of trumpet fanfares, an oral hallucination born of too much wine and too many memento mori paintings. Revolutionary exhumation, bones in the crosshairs. In 1793, amid the fury of the French Revolution, the newly deposed monarchy's vault at Saint-Denis became a target for iconoclasts. Crowds vandalized royal effigies, priests dared not shelter in the dark aisles. On August 1st, a committee of sans-culottes, armed with torches and pikes, broke open the basilica doors. Their mission, to destroy symbols of tyranny, including the nested coffins of the Sun King. What they found, however, froze them in their tracks. As the lead shell cracked open, a cloud of pungent vapors burst forth, an echo of that first stench in 1715. The oak casket beneath was splintered, and when laborers pried back the innermost ebony box, the skeleton of Louis XIV lay in eerie repose. Ribs splayed as if gasping for air, a skull crowned in brittle fleur-de-lis metalwork, and the remnants of royal robes fused to bone. Eyewitness reports speak of men recoiling, vomit lining the steps, and the rallying cry, "No king in our republic." Yet even in revolutionary zeal, some recognized the scientific value. They bundled the bones into crates marked King of France for science, early forensic curiosity, anatomy meets politics. The crates were delivered to a hastily assembled Republican Anatomical Institute in Paris. Robespierre himself is said to have authorized the study, eager to prove that the mighty Louis had fallen prey to mortal flaws like any peasant. Under flickering lantern light, surgeons and medics examined the skeletal remains. They noted severe rheumatoid deformities in the joints, evidence of chronic gout. The skull bore no visible trauma, dispelling rumors of poisoning, but the vertebrae around the lumbar region were pitted, suggesting spinal infection or tuberculosis, a new twist in the medical narrative of the Sun King's final years. These early forensics were rudimentary, no DNA, no microbiology, but they planted seeds for future inquiries. Revolutionary pamphlets immortalized skeleton diagrams annotated in red ink. See here the bones cracked by gout, here the vertebrae eaten by disease. To the revolutionaries it was vindication. Louis XIV had not been immortal, nor had he perished. In divine favor, he had succumbed to ailments that ravaged his flesh and spirit alike. The 19th century osteological revival. After the Revolution, the Bourbon monarchy's brief restoration returned Louis's bones to Saint-Denis, if only to be desecrated again during 19th century anti-royalist riots. It wasn't until 1817 that a cautious Louis XVIII permitted a formal osteological survey led by Baron Guillaume Dupont, a pioneer in bone pathology. Dupont's team cataloged every fracture, lesion, and wear facet, creating the first comprehensive Squelette Royal Atlas. Dupont's journal describes the pelvic girdle's asymmetry, likely from childhood malnutrition, and the fused finger joints of the king's right hand, indicating repetitive strain from signing countless decrees. These findings humanized the monarch. He was a child who'd endured famine, a middle-aged ruler weighed down by paperwork, and a septuagenarian crippled by relentless gout. Dupont concluded that the same body that had radiated authority had become a canvas of suffering long before the gangrene set in. 20th century forensics, the microbial turn fast forward to 1960, when advances in microbiology and radiography converged on Saint-Denis. Under curator Suzanne Leclerc, a tiny bone fragment was sent to the Pasteur Institute. There, researchers used early electron microscopy to detect residual bacterial cell walls, ethylene-resistant spores that hinted at Clostridium perfringens, the culprit behind gas gangrene. This discovery confirmed contemporary physicians' 1715 diagnosis. Gangrene had ravaged Louis's abdomen, not just simple putrefaction of the external wounds. Simultaneously, X-rays of the femur revealed traces of lead, remnants of the embalming lead shell's corrosion. Lead levels were higher than normal, suggesting prolonged exposure to embalming fluids. Pathologists speculated this contributed to chronic lead poisoning symptoms, abdominal pain, confusion, even the delirium described by his attendants. Suddenly, the Sun King's death wasn't just a miasma of natural decay, but a cocktail of gangrene and heavy metal poisoning. Modern DNA and the mystery of Bourbon lineage. In 2005, a clandestine team of geneticists managed to extract mitochondrial DNA from a fragment of hair found among the royal vestments, an achievement fraught with contamination risks. Their analysis matched the DNA to living descendants traced through Bourbon female lines, confirming the remains indeed belonged to Louis XIV. This ended centuries of speculation fueled by missing autopsy reports and revolutionary scatterings of bones. More tantalizing was the discovery of genetic markers associated with familial hemophilia and porphyria, blood disorders that could explain the king's frequent bruising and photosensitivity episodes reported in his journals. While these conditions weren't fatal, they painted a portrait of a monarch beset by hidden ailments that compounded his public struggles and perhaps colored his worldview of divine suffering and human frailty. Artistic resonance, contemporary interpretations. Today, artists continue to grapple with the Sun King's decayed legacy. In 2018, French sculptor Amélie Rousseau unveiled Royaume Mort, a towering steel rendition of Louis's skeleton encrusted with oxidizing copper, symbolizing the corrosive interplay of power and mortality. The installation stands outside the Louvre, its patina evoking both regal grandeur and corrosive ruin. Photographers like Lucien Marc have staged haunting portraits of actors dressed in period garb, reclining in lead-lined coffins with smoke machines billowing phantom vapors, an homage to that first stench in 1715. These works tour global galleries, inviting viewers to confront the point where ritual spectacle becomes literal decay, and to question how our own monuments might one day surrender to entropy. Scientific legacy, from embalming to biotech, medical science has also embraced lessons from Louis XIV's post-mortem. Modern embalming techniques, arterial injection of formaldehyde-based fluids, cavity aspiration, refrigeration, trace conceptual lineage back to failures observed in the Sun King's preservation. In 2020, the École de Médecine in Paris hosted a symposium titled From Versailles to Vils, The Evolution of Body Preservation, acknowledging that each advance, however macabre its origins, stemmed from a desire to study and dignify the human form beyond death. Moreover, regenerative medicine researchers cite historical embalming failures as impetus for developing biocompatible scaffolds that prevent tissue necrosis. The paradox is striking. The same quest to halt decay that once masked suffering now fuels breakthroughs in preserving organs for transplant, prolonging life rather than preserving remains. Cultural afterlives, film, literature, and digital media. Hollywood and European cinema haven't ignored the story either. In 2014, the French-Canadian film Le Dernier Souffle du Roi dramatized Louis XIV's final months, blending period detail with horror tropes, maggots wriggling beneath silk sheets, physicians in blood-spattered gowns, and the king's delirious ramblings about the weight of crowns. Critics hailed it as a visceral meditation on power's rot, while historians praised its fidelity to documented accounts. On Netflix and YouTube, documentaries like The Rotting King and Decay of an Empire use CGI to reconstruct the putrefaction process inside the royal body, juxtaposing medical scans with archival letters. These productions rack up millions of views, proving that fascination with death and royalty remains a potent mix, one that channels our collective anxieties about legacy, mortality, and the invisible processes that eventually reclaim us all. Reflections, power, decay, and the human condition. As we close this saga, consider the irony. Louis XIV built Versailles as an eternal testament to his glory, yet his physical remains defied even that gilded fortress. His body rotted, was excavated, studied, and scattered, while his ideas about absolute power seeded revolutions that reshaped modern democracy. It's a paradox worthy of the theater he so loved. The man who believed himself a living god was undone by microscopic agents and elemental entropy. His story reminds us that no throne, no matter how radiant, can withstand time's corrosion. Scientific curiosity can spring from morbid failure. Art can find beauty in decay. Societies can learn humility from a rotting monarch. And perhaps most unsettling, it shows how the line between spectacle and reality can blur. When pageantry becomes pathology, and the greatest actor on history's stage finds himself powerless to deliver the final bow. Thank you for joining this 4-part exploration of Louis XIV's bizarre odyssey, from sovereign splendor to skeletal infamy. If you've enjoyed the journey, hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts. Which twist surprised you most? Where will you encounter decay, literal or metaphorical, in your own world? Drop a comment below, and until next time, keep shining your own light. Just remember, all light fades eventually. Imagine a monarch whose very holiness depended on a layer of grime. so convinced that washing would wash away her divine favor that she made her court reek with the scent of sanctity. Intrigued? You should be. Born into the tumult of 16th century Europe, Isabella of Navarre arrived in the world under turbulent skies and prophetic omens. Her parents, King John III and Queen Catherine, ruled a realm perched between the Pyrenees and the Iberian kingdoms, an almost forgotten duchy where loyalty was as fickle as mountain weather. From the moment she took her first breath, Isabella was marked by whispers of destiny. Church bells tolled in the dead of night, and court astrologers proclaimed that the newborn princess bore the sign of the Virgo constellation, emblem of purity and divine favor. Yet as Isabella grew, so did her eccentricities. Scholars at her side noted her devotion to prayer, but also her fierce aversion to water. Baths, they wrote, were an affront to the flesh, washing away not only dirt, but the blessings that clung to skin like morning dew. By her 16th birthday, when most noble women dipped toes into fountains to cool summer heat, Isabella had long abandoned her bathhouse visits. Instead, she invested in layers of fragrant oils and elaborate powders, covering her unwashed hair in veils and her scented gown with laces, convinced that her bodily austerity elevated her soul. A princess raised on paradox. Isabella's upbringing balanced on a tightrope of conflicting influences. Her mother, devout and discreetly learned, insisted on daily baths for health, a lesson Isabella listened to politely, then promptly ignored. Her father, more worldly, admired her piety, but worried for the court's reputation. Foreign envoys would wrinkle their noses at the stench emanating from palace corridors. Yet Isabella argued that perfumes and powders sufficed. Why sully sacred flesh with water when clay particles could serve penance? Tutors observed her with a mixture of awe and horror. Father Miguel, her confessor, praised her decades-long fasts and nightly vigils, even as he winced when he entered her chambers and smelled the overwhelming mix of musk, rose water, and unwashed humanity. Your Majesty, he once dared whisper in the dim glow of a candlelit oratory, the body is God's vessel. Surely it deserves more care. Isabella calmly replied that earthly care was vanity. True devotion lay in accepting the body's natural state, free from human contrivance. By the time she was crowned Queen of Navarre at age 18, the practice was non-negotiable. A papal dispensation, ostensibly to accommodate her extreme piety, allowed Isabella to maintain her no-water vow. Under the guise of asceticism, palace servants ceased filling her bath chambers. The royal laundress was instructed to limit linen washing to ceremonial garments only. And so Isabella's personal chapel became perfumed not by incense alone, but by the subtle but unmistakable aroma of a queen who shunned water. The smell of sanctity. Early on, courtiers coined a term that would follow her through history, the holy reek. They described the queen's presence as a heady cloud, part rose, part musk, part unwashed flesh, as if God himself had anointed her in secret. Pilgrims came from distant dioceses hoping to inhale her sanctity and gain psychic relief from worldly woes. Some reported visions of saints in her presence, attributing their revelations to proximity with her unique fragrance. Others, less devout, simply collapsed in fainting fits. In council chambers, diplomats coughed behind scarves, but feigned admiration. The Spanish ambassador sent bouquets of jasmine, lavender, and orange blossom to cushion the effect. The English envoy gifted Isabella a silver ewer labeled "for graceful ablutions," which the queen accepted with a gracious bow, then placed on a pedestal as an art piece, never to be used. Religious justification and public perception. Isabella's reasoning lay in the Church Fathers. She cited St. Jerome's warning about bathing one's soul in the same waters that delight the flesh, and St. Anthony's temptations in the wilderness, where deprivation became spiritual armor. In her sermons, she compared water to the seductive snares of the devil, momentary relief at the cost of eternal vigilance. By remaining unwashed, she argued, she kept one foot in the desert alongside the earliest hermits, untouched by worldly comforts, untempted by vanity. In the public square, however, opinions diverge. Townsfolk outside Pamplona muttered about a queen who smelled of sin, not sanctity. Local physicians warned of health risks, unwashed bodies being breeding grounds for lice and disease. Yet Isabella's fervent supporters insisted that faith, not hygiene, preserved the body's purity. Street preachers seized her example in fiery sermons. Some lauded her as the living embodiment of spiritual resilience. Others damned her as a false saint, a gruesome parody of Christ's own sufferings. Court rituals, powdering and piety. To manage her unique condition, Isabella instituted elaborate rituals. Each dawn, anointed attendants, known as the perfumed order, prepared her for the day. First, a team applied scented oils, almond, rose, myrrh, layer upon layer. Then, they dusted her hair and skin with herbal powders, orris root to keep lice at bay, barley flour to absorb excess oils, and a secret blend of goat's milk powder mixed with saffron for a golden glow. A final dusting of civet musk, transported from the Ottoman Empire, ensured a regal veil that lasted until dusk. These rituals became pageant. Courtiers vied for positions in the perfumed order, hoping proximity would grant them favor. Writers at the court of Navarre recorded the liturgy in minute detail, which musks elicited faint piety, which floral notes triggered emotional visions. Isabella, seated on her throne, would inhale deeply as her chamber filled with aromatic smoke, then pronounce blessings on her loyal subjects. Diplomatic incidents and personal anecdotes, of course. Total aversion to water led to unforgettable moments. At one lavish banquet celebrating a peace treaty with Aragon, Isabella fainted when an overzealous page knocked over a pitcher of citrus-infused water. She recoiled as though struck by lightning, crying out that her sanctity had been violated. The fountains in the courtyard were painted over in dull gray to prevent accidental spritzes. When Spanish soldiers performed mock naval drills in a reflecting pool, Isabella retreated behind tapestries, glaring at ripples as though they bore the mark of Satan. A famous anecdote involves Lady Clara Montoya, a visiting Italian noblewoman, who brought a silver flask of scented spring water as a gift. When Isabella accepted it graciously, Montoya breathed a sigh of relief, until the queen displayed it on a glass pedestal in the palace chapel, under the inscription, "Worldly temptation, quelled by divine will." Family tensions and court intrigue. Not everyone in the royal family supported the practice. Isabella's younger sister, Princess Beatrice, delighted in public baths and open-air fountains. She organized clandestine bathing parties for sympathetic ladies-in-waiting, masked gatherings where laughter rang over the sound of splashing water. These secret soirees became hotbeds of gossip, fueling rumors that Beatrice plotted to stage a coup, douse her sister in water, and claim the throne on grounds of cleanliness and common sense. Beatrice's intrigue reached its peak during the Loewen Festival of St. John, when masked revelers danced around bonfires and leapt over embers. According to one cavalier's diary, Beatrice planned to release doves near Isabella, each carrying a tiny vial of perfumed water. The plan was foiled when Isabella's perfumed order intercepted the birds, and the would-be coup plotters were banished to the border garrison. A holiness tested by sorrow. Tragedy struck in Isabella's 25th year, when her infant son, heir to the throne, fell ill with smallpox. Physicians recommended cleansing his skin to stave off infection. Isabella refused, believing that the boy's unwashed state would unite his suffering with Christ's, granting him heavenly protection. The court chaplain begged her to reconsider. "Even our Lord washed the leper's wounds," he implored, but Isabella stood firm. The prince died after a week of agonized fever, and the queen withdrew into mourning chambers redolent of cedar and myrrh, refusing both water and worldly consolation. Public sentiment shifted. Where once Isabella's holiness had intrigued pilgrims, now it evoked pity and unease. Chroniclers wrote that her tears, precious and rinsed in celestial sorrow, fell upon unwashed cheeks, each drop a testament to faith untempered by mercy for the living, sounding the alarm in Rome. News of Isabella's holy reek drifted southward on the lips of traveling merchants and Venetian envoys. By the time word reached Rome, the papal court was aflutter with brochures and whispered accusations. Cardinal Girolamo Aldobrandini, prefect of the Congregation of Rites, dispatched his secretary, Father Stefano Castiglione, with delicate instructions. Observe the queen's piety, but weigh it against scandal. Father Castiglione arrived incognito in Donazzurco, the Navarrese capital, posing as a medic interested in herbal remedies. He attended Isabella's public devotions in the Grand Basilica of Santa Maria la Real, inhaling the heady bouquet of musk and cedar as incense burned above the altar. He questioned her confessors, scribbled furiously in his codex, and took meticulous notes on her public rituals. By candlelight, he reported back to Rome, Isabella's aversion to water was not born of madness, nor merely of ascetic fervor. It was a deliberate act of spiritual symbolism. In her sermons, she referenced obscure church fathers and apocryphal desert hermits, weaving a theology of unwashed flesh as a reflection of Christ's own suffering. Yet, for every theological nuance, thousands of Novares coughed in her presence, and rumors of foul odors reached even the Vatican kitchens. The papal bull of Munditia Divina, alarmed by this duality of devout intent and public nuisance, Pope Gregory XIII commissioned a formal inquiry. In 1582, he issued the bull Munditia Divina, condemning any practice whereby the faithful approximate sanctity by rejecting the bodily care ordained by nature and tradition. The text skirted her name, but its meaning was clear. Royal or not, Isabella's theology of grime was suspect. Distribution of Munditia Divina was slow. Couriers took weeks to cross the Pyrenees. When it finally arrived at Navarre's foreign office, Isabella received it in her private oratory, surrounded by gold-leafed icons and the embalmed relic of a local saint. She read the decree aloud to her inner circle. Servants wept, confessors trembled, and Lord Chancellor Francisco de Montalvo rushed to draft her response, a defense of divine paradox, and a request for papal dispensation to continue her practices. The Queen's letter, bold, eloquent, and scented with frankincense, argued that Christ himself had sanctified poverty and deprivation, and that water, though pure, could be used for vanity as easily as cleanliness. She proposed a compromise. She would permit a ceremonial foot washing once a year on Maundy Thursday, in imitation of the apostles, but otherwise claim her ancient precedent. This missive, dispatched by mule train, would determine her fate. Spies, saboteurs, and the water conspiracy. Meanwhile, at Versailles, Madrid, and London, Isabella's reputation swung between awe and derision. King Philip II of Spain, ever the staunch Catholic, wrote privately that a queen who shunned water risked spreading disease throughout Christendom. He dispatched Don Miguel de Cordoba, an agent skilled in espionage, to smuggle a basin of blessed spring water into Isabella's private chapel. Under cover of night, Cordoba and two Jesuit collaborators slipped into the palace courtyard, evading sentries with forged passes. They crept along the gallery to the chapel door, where Cordoba produced a silver basin inscribed with the papal crest. At that moment, a lone chamberlain on guard breathlessly intercepted them, the clatter of metal echoing down marble halls. Alarm bells rang and palace guards surged. Cordoba narrowly escaped, throwing the basin into a fountain and disappearing into the night. The incident became legend. Isabella joked it proved Satan himself fears water near the anointed. She commissioned a tapestry depicting the scene, a silver basin sinking beneath rippling water, a haloed queen bathed in candlelight. To her enemies, it was mockery. To her followers, a proof of divine vindication. An alliance with the beggar monks. In a twist no court could have predicted, Isabella found allies among an order of mendicant monks, the Fratres Vias Perfida, brothers of the perilous way. These itinerant holy men practiced voluntary filth as a sign of solidarity with Christ's lepers, refusing baths and sleeping in city gutters. They preached that societal obsession with cleanliness masked spiritual decay, and they saw in Isabella a mortal mirror of their own vows. Their leader, Brother Anselm of La Royere, arrived at the palace gates with a handful of ragged friars. At first, the perfumed order recoiled. The monks smelled of the unwashed masses. Yet Isabella welcomed them as kindred spirits. She granted them rooms in the conventual quarters, funded their wanderings, and publicly embraced them during Maundy Thursday ceremonies, when she performed her one annual foot washing and they abstained entirely. Together, queen and monks hosted a liturgy of the unwashed, a half-theatrical mass in which lay pilgrims queued to kiss the frayed hems of the monks' robes and inhale matted hair. Scores claimed visions of Mary and John the Baptist. The spectacle cemented Isabella's saintly mystique among the devout, even as critics condemned it as a grotesque carnival. Diplomatic gambits and shifting alliances. While the religious authorities and courtly factions wrestled over theology, realpolitik pressed on. France's Catherine de' Medici, always shrewd, saw an opportunity. By courting Isabella as a spiritual counterweight to Spanish Catholicism, she might weaken Philip II's influence in the Pyrenees. Catherine dispatched a delegation bearing amphora of fleur-de-lis stamped eau de toilette, accompanied by letters praising the queen's sanctity. Isabella accepted the gifts, but redirected the eau de toilette to military hospitals, where nurses used it sparingly to revive soldiers scarred by war. She thanked Catherine for her generosity, adding, "Let the fragrance of charity flow where water dares not go." The gesture flattered the Medici court and earned Isabella grudging respect in Paris. Meanwhile, Elizabeth I of England, keenly aware of the intrigue, sent envoys with oak barrels of rainwater from English moors. They claimed the purity of untampered rain would break Isabella's theological deadlock. The barrels arrived under guard. Isabella's council deliberated for days before politely returning them with a dedication to Saint Catherine of Alexandria. Elizabeth's gambit failed to sway doctrine, but the political statement was heard loud and clear. The great medical debate. Amid political maneuvering, Navarre's university town, Estella, became a battleground for early public health theory. Professors of medicine, once content to lecture on Hippocrates, now penned treatises arguing that unwashed skin fostered pathogenic seeds, while others defended Isabella's conviction that faith repelled disease. Academic disputations drew crowds, students perched on benches, inhaling the combatants' oratorical jabs as they argued over bile, miasma, and the soul's contagion. One famed debate, held in the lecture hall of the Collegium Sancti Michaelis, featured Dr. Elena Ruiz, a pioneering anatomy lecturer, against Dr. Rodrigo Alvarez, royal physician to the Queen. Dr. Ruiz displayed lice under magnifying lenses, demonstrating their life cycle and potential to spread typhus. Dr. Alvarez countered by invoking Isabella's own record of miraculous recoveries from minor illnesses, attributing it to divine protection. The audience erupted in shouts. Some demanded mandatory baths, others chanted "Viva la Reina," convinced that the Queen's sanctity formed a literal health barrier. A court ruled by fragrance. By now, daily life at court was choreographed around scent and ritual. Bedrooms were lined with velvet hangings soaked in citrus distillates. Council meetings began with sachets passed around, dried lavender for calm, wormwood for clarity, patchouli for courage. Whenever Isabella passed, her perfumed odor trailed her with censers of musk and ambergris. Courtiers began adopting their own signature odors. The Duke of Olite dabbed himself with sandalwood oil to curry favor. The Bishop of Pamplona carried a vial of camphor to mask any residual odors. Etiquette manuals, newly printed in the shops of Tudela, prescribed proper olfactory conduct, advising everyone from chambermaids to ambassadors on how to navigate the scented minefield. In this world, a misplaced whiff could end careers. The Countess of Lorraine, once Isabella's favorite, was exiled after inadvertently wearing a rose-scented glove that clashed with the Queen's cedar musk. The agreed-upon verdict: the Countess had committed an act of personal vanity, overshadowing the royal aura. She departed Navarre with a single retainer and her rose gloves in a sealed chest, the crown's fraying edges. Despite her theological defenses and diplomatic triumphs, cracks began to show. Rural barons complained that their tenants were abandoning wells and washhouses, thinking the Queen's example providential. Epidemics of scabies and typhus surged in border villages, prompting calls for imperial intervention. The Spanish Inquisition threatened to apply Munditia Divina with force, calling for her removal if she endangered her subjects. Isabella responded with a royal edict. She would fund public hygiene projects in towns, paving streets, constructing bathhouses, drilling wells, but only for communal benefit. She banned private baths among the nobility, arguing that equality in water access humbled the upper classes. Barons grudgingly accepted, though they placed the new facilities outside their walled manors, as if to keep washing as a concession to the masses. In the stillness of her bedchamber, behind layers of perfumed curtains and flickering candlelight, Queen Isabella of Navarre stared at her own reflection, not in a mirror, but in a polished silver icon of St. Agnes. The saint, young and radiant, seemed to glimmer in pristine holiness. Yet Isabella could see her own gaunt face staring back, eyes rimmed with sleeplessness, skin pale beneath layers of scented powder. For the first time in years, doubt crept in, and it stank of fear. The secret journals Isabella's confessor, Father Inigo de Villalobos, kept a locked cabinet beneath the chapel altar. Inside, bound in goatskin and sealed with wax, were volumes of the Queen's private writings, confessions, meditations, and apocalyptic visions that never saw the light of day. In them, Isabella wrote not of saints, but of decay. "I dream," she penned one restless night, "of rivers that dry in my wake, of flowers that wilt at my touch. The air closes around me like a shroud, yet I feel the kiss of heaven in every breathless hour." Her words were fevered, filled with doubt. She questioned whether her holy abstinence had become vanity in itself, a performance more than a calling. The journals revealed an obsession not with cleanliness, but with control. Control over her body, her court, and her people. In choosing not to wash, Isabella believed she was resisting not just sin, but the flesh itself. "The body tempts with comfort," she wrote, "but the soul demands fire." The midnight conspiracy. While Isabella wrestled with her spiritual fears, a conspiracy brewed among her closest advisors. The Council of the Scented Veil, a group of hand-picked nobles and clergy loyal to the Queen, had grown increasingly divided. Lord Chancellor Montalvo, once her most loyal supporter, now worried aloud about rebellion, pestilence, and civil collapse. Secret letters were exchanged, sealed with wax imprints of oak leaves, the sign of a covert faction calling themselves Custodes Puritatis, guardians of purity. Their goal, to force the Queen to bathe, whether by persuasion or by coercion. In the summer of 1583, the conspirators devised a bold plan. During the feast of St. Bartholomew, when Isabella would retire to her mountain retreat in Roncesvalles for silent contemplation, her personal attendants would be replaced one by loyal members of Custodes Puritatis. There, under the cover of a ritual anointing, they would draw a bath of snowmelt and rosewater, forcibly immerse the Queen, and declare her spiritually renewed. They believed the act would break her delusion, restore health to the realm, and satisfy Rome. What they did not anticipate was Isabella's vigilance. The night of the snow bath, on August 23rd, Isabella arrived at Roncesvalles with a small retinue. The mountain air was sharp, carrying the scent of pine and melting snow. That evening, under a full moon, her chamber was prepared with unusual care. The stone floor scrubbed, incense burned in excess, and in freshly cut linens laid out on her bed. As she knelt in prayer, she noticed the firewood smelled different, cedar, not the usual birch. Her sharp nose, trained over years of sensory discipline, caught it immediately. Suspicious, she demanded her chamberlain explain the change. He stammered. Moments later, a servant girl tripped over a silver basin hidden behind a tapestry. It clattered across the floor, spilling fragrant rose petals and steaming water. Realization hit. The betrayal was at hand. Isabella stood, eyes blazing, and proclaimed aloud, "You would drown my soul to save your flesh." The attendants fell to their knees, pleading mercy. That night, the Queen dismissed half her retinue and sent word to Pamplona. The court was compromised. The conspirators fled, their letters seized. Lord Montalvo was imprisoned. In Roncesvalles, Isabella retreated deeper into solitude, and deeper into her unwashed sanctity. The people's revolt. Back in the capital, unrest simmered. News of the failed snow bath spread quickly, and with it, rumors of divine wrath. A typhus outbreak in the southern provinces had claimed hundreds. Peasants whispered that the Queen's refusal to bathe had angered the saints. Urban mobs in Tudela and Estella rioted, demanding purification rites and the Queen's public penance. In the Plaza de la Reina, effigies were burned. Mock queens draped in perfumed rags tossed into bonfires with cries of, "Cleanse the land, cleanse the Queen." The palace gates remained shut, guarded day and night by the perfumed order. Isabella responded not with fear, but with pageantry. On the feast of St. Michael, she emerged on the palace balcony wearing a robe woven with gold thread, her body perfumed with sandalwood and myrrh. She addressed the crowd, "My people, the flesh may rot, but the soul is eternal. I have chosen the scent of heaven over the lie of mortal purity. If my body offends, avert your gaze, for I am wedded to Christ, not to kings." Some wept, others jeered, but the spectacle worked, the crowd dispersed, the revolt faltered, yet the seeds of rebellion had been sown. A visit from Rome. In early 1584, a papal envoy arrived, Cardinal Lorenzo Borgia, cousin of the infamous Cesare Borgia, and known for his ruthless diplomacy. He requested a private audience with Isabella, during which no servants, no guards, and no perfumers were allowed. The queen met him in her private chapel, dimly lit and heavy with incense. The cardinal, famously fastidious, wore gloves and carried a lace kerchief soaked in vinegar. Their exchange was terse. Borgia presented her with a final decree. Unless she renounced her doctrine of holy filth and submitted to a public purification, the Holy See would excommunicate her, strip her of her titles, and declare Navarre a protectorate under Spanish control. Isabella remained silent for a long time. Then, slowly, she rose, approached a small font of holy water by the altar, and dipped her fingers into it. She made the sign of the cross. "I will not wash," she whispered, "but I will bleed if I must." Borgia departed in silence. His report to Rome was scathing. "The queen is mad with sanctity. Her body stinks of martyrdom. Her court reeks of rebellion. She will not bend. She must be broken." A holy relic or a living curse? As Isabella's legend grew, so did the mythology around her. Some claimed her touch healed the sick. Others insisted her odor caused miscarriages and cattle deaths. Pilgrims arrived in droves, desperate for miracles, or simply to catch a glimpse of the queen who defied both soap and Rome. A merchant from Florence wrote, "I have seen the queen of stench. She walks among her people like incense on legs, her skin pale, her eyes of fire. I do not know if she is saint or sorceress, but I cannot forget her." Priests debated her sanctity. Was she a living relic, preserved in divine filth, or a blasphemous idol, exalting herself above God? Theologians in Paris and Bologna wrote competing treatises, while artists painted her likeness with both reverence and horror, robes fluttering, odors swirling like halos around her. The queen, alone. In her final years, Isabella grew increasingly isolated. Few dared approach her without scented veils. Her bedchamber became a sanctum of ritual, where she fasted, prayed, and wrote. Her final journal entries grew sparse, then frantic. "I smell heaven. It comes closer each night." She saw visions, saints, angels, and the Virgin herself, beckoning her toward eternity. Yet she remained in her flesh, unwashed, waiting. Her body weakened. Sores appeared. Her confessor begged her to cleanse herself just once before death. "Water," she murmured, "is for the living. I am already halfway gone." It began with a silence. For days, the bells of Pamplona rang not for mass, nor for weddings or feasts, but for something unspoken, a dread that hung in the air heavier than incense. Behind the palace gates, in the queen's private chambers, Isabella of Navarre lay dying, and the air around her was thick, not just with the scent of decay, but with expectation. The last days, by the spring of 1585, Isabella had become a living relic. Her body, racked by fever and covered in sores, no longer obeyed her. Yet still, she refused water. Her physicians, 4 of the most learned men in Christendom, begged her to allow a final cleansing. She refused. "I have given my flesh to the Lord," she whispered. "I will not take it back." For hours she lay in silence, broken only by whispered prayers. Her attendants rotated in shifts, perfuming her chamber so heavily that one collapsed from the fumes. The stench, once faint and bearable, had become overwhelming. Yet Isabella seemed oblivious, even serene. She believed she was transcending the body, shedding the final remnants of the mortal world. Her spiritual advisors read to her from the life of St. Simeon Stylites, the hermit who lived atop a pillar for decades without washing. Isabella smiled faintly. Visions and omens. On the night of April 3rd, a comet streaked across the sky above Pamplona. Peasants fell to their knees, declaring it a sign. Some said it was the angel of death. Others claimed it was a chariot of saints, come to escort the queen to heaven. Inside the palace, Isabella claimed to see St. Agnes at the foot of her bed, clothed in white, her arms outstretched. She murmured to her confessor, "The angels come with silver bowls. They do not wash, they anoint." That same night, a tremor shook the hills around Roncesvalles. The mountain chapel where Isabella had once defied the snow bath cracked along its walls. Locals saw it as divine approval or warning, the death of a queen. On the morning of April 7th, 1585, at precisely the 9th hour, Queen Isabella took her final breath. She was surrounded not by courtiers, but by monks, chanting hymns to the Virgin. Her last words, barely audible, were, "No water, only light," and then silence. For a moment, the room was still. Then her chamberlain stepped forward, covering her face with a veil of white lace. A bell tolled. The queen was dead. Or was she? The body that would not rot tradition dictated that a queen be embalmed and entombed within days. But when her physicians attempted to prepare her body, they were stopped, not by decay, but by something unnatural. According to multiple eyewitnesses, Isabella's body, though untouched by water for over 30 years, showed no signs of rot. Her skin, pale and dry, remained intact. Her eyes were closed peacefully, her limbs supple. Priests declared it a miracle. Word spread, the queen's body was incorruptible, a sign of divine favor. Thousands flocked to see her. The air around her bier was heavy with perfume, but many swore she emitted a sweet scent, like lilies and myrrh. Rome was skeptical. They sent an investigator, Father Matteo Albinoni, who examined the body under strict conditions. His report was cautious. There is no decay. Whether by divine means or natural preservation, I dare not say, but the flesh is whole. Saint or heretic? The debate ignited across Europe. Was Isabella a saint preserved by her holy refusal to bathe, or a madwoman whose mind had rotted long before her body? In Navarre, pilgrims declared her Isabella the Pure, while in Spain, detractors called her Isabella the Stinking Queen. Satirical plays were written. One, titled The Perfumed Throne, depicted her as a ghost who haunted courtiers with her odor. Rome convened a council to discuss canonization. They reviewed her writings, her acts of charity, her unyielding devotion. But the bishops were divided. Some praised her spiritual discipline. Others condemned her as a radical, a woman who defied church teachings on humility and bodily care. Pope Sixtus V delivered the verdict: Queen Isabella shall not be canonized. Let her rest in earth, not in glory. The secret burial, fearing unrest, the royal court buried Isabella in secret. Under cover of night, her body was interred in a sealed crypt beneath the Cathedral of Pamplona. No monument marked her grave, only a single inscription, carved in Latin. She chose the scent of heaven. But the story did not end there. The legend grows for centuries. Tales of Queen Isabella the Unwashed endured. Peasants left flowers at her secret tomb. Nobles wore scented amulets, said to protect them from spiritual corruption, in her honor. In 1703, her crypt was reopened during renovations. Her body, reportedly, remained intact. The bishop who saw it fainted. The crypt was resealed. Today, historians debate the truth. Was Isabella preserved by natural mummification, the result of diet, climate, and perfume? Or was it something more? Some scholars argue she was an early ascetic feminist, rejecting beauty standards and courtly vanity. Others see her as a tragic figure, driven by obsession and fear. But all agree, she changed history. Her reign forced the church to confront the limits of sanctity. Her story inspired art, literature, and myth, and her legacy lingers, strange, sacred, and impossible to forget. Imagine a queen so devoted to symbolism and austerity that she wore the same dress every single day for 30 years. Intrigued? You should be. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. Part 1. The Dress That Became Her Destiny. Born amidst palace intrigue and prophetic omens, Queen Eleanor of Alderwin entered the world under a blood moon. Her parents, King Rowan and Queen Isabella, ruled a tiny but wealthy duchy tucked between misty moorlands and jagged coastal cliffs. From her first steps, Eleanor showed a singular focus rarely seen in royalty. While other princesses played with ribbons and toys, she was fixated on one gown. A simple, unadorned dress of deep forest green velvet embroidered with a single golden oak leaf over her heart. By her 12th birthday, Eleanor had claimed that dress as her destiny. She wore it during prayers, lessons, festivals, even to schoolrooms when she studied philosophy. Tutors reported that she changed into nothing else. Court seamstresses offered more fashionable attire, but she refused. In her sermons, even before she was crowned, she would speak of the dress as a sacred vessel, a symbol of humility and constancy in a world of change. At 18, when she was crowned queen, the court expected new regalia, jewel-encrusted gowns, silken robes embroidered with heraldry. Instead, Eleanor ascended the throne in that same green dress, arranging her coronation robes over it. The court gasped. The ambassadors polished their lenses and stared, a crowned sovereign in a single garment unchanged for 6 years. The dress fitted her perfectly. Seamstresses marveled at how it neither faded nor frayed, despite constant wear. It seemed enchanted. Nobles whispered that she would order fabric, but demanded it cut into ribbons and burned. Any replacement offered was refused. To Eleanor, the dress represented her bond to the land, a living oak root metaphor. Each oak leaf embroidered over her heart reminded her that a queen's duty was deep-rooted strength, not gilded caprice. Over the next decade, the dress became her trademark. When war ravaged Alderwyn, she rode to battlefields wearing it. When plague struck, she tended to victims in hospitals clad in the same silk. When poets composed odes, they wrote of the Emerald Queen whose gown outlives seasons. Photographers, yes, later historians believed to exist, attempted to capture her image, only to find that the dress looked identical in portraits 15 years apart. But the dress wasn't perfect. By her 40th year, quilted patches began to show at the elbows and hem. The golden oak leaf looked tarnished. Her courtiers offered discreet patching, whispered repairs, yet she refused. "Each worn spot tells my service," she said. "To stitch it anew is to erase a memory." Some courtiers thought the fixations childish. Others regarded them inspirational. Ambassadors knelt before her, not dazzled by diamonds, but humbled by her constancy. Philosophers drew parallels. The dress, unchanged, signified moral integrity amid shifting alliances. In a world of cyclical violence, she chose a fixed emblem of peace. At home, commoners began replicating the dress's style in peasant homes, simple green tunics with oak embroidery. Even soldiers took to wearing a single green sash as homage. In markets, seamstresses sold Eleanor cloth, dyed deep evergreen, promising 1 yard might hold droplets of royal virtue. Yet beneath the performative simplicity lay personal struggle. The dress clung too tightly at times, the hem frayed painfully. Eleanor bathed in cold streams with the dress still on, believing water cleansed the soul, not the garment. Servants reported strange stains, blood, soil, tears, accumulating in the fabric's folds, but she refused to launder it. Historians later speculated about fabric science. Some suggested the velvet was spun with mineral fibers that resisted decay. Others believed herbal treatments Eleanor herself concocted, coating the fibers with preserving oils. Eleanor denied resorting to enchantment. "If my body ages, let the dress bear witness. If the gown lasts, it is faith." By the 20th year of her reign, and 20 with that same garment, the dress had become part of the stabilizing myth of Alderwyn. When foreign envoys compared notes, they joked. The queen ruled not through rotating wardrobes, but eternal green velvet. Poets wrote, "Her garment outlasts her glory, but glories outlast her days." Every stitch was stitched by memory. Every tear was testimony. In the candlelit chambers of her private oratory, Eleanor would kneel, the oak leaf glowing in lamplight, and whisper, "Let me be the woman who does not bend." But her ministers worried. What if illness claimed her suddenly? What if a coup demanded quick donning of war armor? She refused. "In the dress of my youth I remain true," she declared, refusing ceremonial armor or state livery. Thus, the first 2 decades passed, the dress unworn by customers or fashion, yet unyielding to time. It bore her triumphs and tragedies, laughter and loss. And Eleanor's figure, clad in that constant fabric, became legend in living color, a queen who defined sovereignty by simplicity, constancy, and courage. Part 2. the dress that defied empires. For the first 20 years of Queen Eleanor's reign, the green velvet dress stood as a symbol of unwavering devotion and constancy. But symbols, as history teaches us, can stir not just reverence, but resistance, and not everyone bowed to Eleanor's vision. The first cracks appeared not in the fabric, but in the court itself. By her third decade on the throne, younger nobles, born after her coronation, saw the dress not as sanctified tradition, but stubborn obsession. They whispered that her unchanging garment stifled the duchy's image, made Alderwin seem backward, frozen in time. A realm clothed in the past, one ambassador said, is a realm unfit for the future. The nobles' discontent reached a climax during the Grand Jubilee of Alderwin, commemorating Eleanor's 30th year as queen. Dignitaries from across the continent gathered, dressed in splendid attire, silks from the Orient, gold-threaded robes from southern empires, robes embroidered with gems worth a king's ransom, all on display. And yet, when Queen Eleanor appeared at the palace gates clad in that same green dress, now faded and threadbare, the crowd fell into a stunned silence. It wasn't the color, it wasn't even the age, it was the undeniable presence of wear. The fabric clung loosely now, sagging at the sleeves. Patches at the elbows had become frayed. The once vibrant oak leaf upon her chest had dulled to a pale yellow. Her crown shone above it all, but the contrast was stark, regal gold atop tired velvet. And still she smiled, lifted her hand, and addressed the crowd. This dress has walked through war, famine, joy, and birth. It is my story, and I shall not betray it for vanity. That speech was recorded in the annals of Alderwin, but what was not recorded publicly was the rebellion that followed. Lord Cedric of the House Vailmont, a younger noble with imperial ambitions, sought to overthrow Eleanor, not through force of arms, but through fashion. He began commissioning public murals of the queen in imagined new robes shimmering with silver. "Honor Her Majesty," his campaign proclaimed, "with new garments worthy of her reign." He even hosted a lavish ball where all guests wore replicas of the dress, but in vibrant colors, crimson, sapphire, gold. It was, he claimed, an act of admiration. But to Eleanor, it was a declaration of war. In a letter to her closest advisor, she wrote, "Let them wear colors of the rainbow if they wish. My truth is not in dyes or gold. It is in thread worn by service. Their silks will rot long before mine is finished." Yet the threat was real. Lord Cedric's movement gained momentum. Peasants, some weary of austerity, embraced his call for a renewal of the realm. Tailors began to offer discounts on new Eleanor gowns, vibrant and youthful. The queen's once revered dress now faced parody. And then disaster struck. One autumn evening, during a feast in the royal hall, a court jester named Alric performed a daring act. Dressed in a perfect mimicry of Eleanor's gown, he danced before the queen, mocking her with exaggerated curtsies and oaths. The court laughed nervously. Eleanor remained still, but Alric had prepared a final jest. With a flourish, he reached into his sleeve and withdrew something no one expected, the golden oak leaf from Eleanor's own gown, snatched days earlier during a private sermon. He waved it before the crowd, shouting, "A leaf from the tree of eternity, or merely a patch of cloth?" The hall fell silent. Eleanor rose, walked to Alric, and took the leaf back wordlessly. She didn't punish him. She didn't speak. She simply turned and left the feast, her retreat as silent as the air that had suddenly chilled. But that night a royal decree was issued. Let it be known, this dress and all that it bears is sacred to the crown. Any who mock it, seek to alter it, or profane its meaning shall be considered traitors to the realm. Lord Cedric's movement dissolved within weeks. Still, the queen's dress continued to deteriorate. Courtiers pleaded for her to allow reinforcement, new stitching, a replica perhaps. She refused all offers. "To replace it," she said, "is to replace myself." And as years passed, her belief deepened. From symbolic to spiritual, Eleanor began to experience visions, or so she claimed. In letters to the abbess of Alderwin's holy order, she wrote of dreaming of an ancient forest where oak trees whispered in tongues unknown. In these visions, she wandered barefoot, always wearing the same dress, which never tore or faded but glowed faintly under the moon. "The dress," she wrote, is my tether to the eternal oak, the axis of the world. Monks began referring to her as the Green Madonna. Pilgrims traveled great distances to glimpse her during public appearances. Some swore that when the sun struck her dress just so, it shimmered with life, as though the fabric breathed, and yet not everyone saw holiness. In the neighboring empire of Velgrad, a shrewd ruler named Emperor Malric viewed Eleanor's attire as a weakness. She clings to rags, he told his war council, as a beggar does to scraps. We shall see how her dress holds against fire. War came swiftly. Velgrad's army swept across Alderwin's borders, and the court urged Eleanor to flee, to don armor, to wear the garb of war. She refused. Instead, she rode into battle wearing the same green dress, now nearly black with wear, but still intact. On the fields of Ardent Hollow, she stood atop the ramparts, her form a solitary figure of green amidst steel. The Velgrad forces hesitated, not out of awe, but confusion. Was this queen mad? Was she a symbol, or something more? And then, a miracle, as the legend goes. A storm broke, lightning struck the ground near Eleanor, the wind tore through the valley. Soldiers swore that, in that moment, her dress seemed to glow, not with light, but with defiance. The oak leaf, damp with rain, reflected the flash of lightning as if gold. Velgrad's army faltered. Some called it weather, others called it divine. But after that battle, won by Alderwin, Eleanor's legend was sealed. No one again dared to question the dress. It became not merely her attire, but a relic in the making, alive, worn, eternal. And within the palace, even her critics began to wonder, could she remove it if she wanted to? Or had she, in truth, become one with the garment? Part 3. Threads of Power, Threads of Madness. Years passed. Queen Eleanor, now old and frail, seemed to draw all her strength from the very dress that cloaked her. What once was soft velvet had hardened with age, creased, stiffened, almost leathery in places. The green had turned a deep mossy hue, the fabric clinging to her frame like a second skin. And rumors began to swirl, not in the streets, not among nobles, but within the very walls of her palace. The dress, they said, had changed her. Handmaidens whispered of strange sights. They claimed Eleanor no longer slept in her grand bedchamber, but in a hidden room deep within the palace's oldest wing, a place no servant was allowed to enter. It was said to be damp and cold, the walls lined with oak bark, the air heavy with the scent of earth and mildew. One night, a young attendant named Lysara disobeyed the queen's order. Curious and terrified, she followed Eleanor after the evening prayers, slipping through shadowed corridors, keeping her distance. What she saw haunted her for the rest of her days. Eleanor entered a chamber Lysara had never known existed. There were no guards, only an ancient oak door, carved with symbols not of the realm's religion, but of something older. From within, a soft green glow pulsed. Lysara dared to peek through the cracked door. Eleanor stood in the center of the room, her dress fully unfurled around her. In the flickering lamplight, it seemed to breathe. The queen chanted in a tongue Lysara could not understand. Before her, a basin filled with thick, dark water. And then, the unthinkable. Eleanor bent and fed the dress from the basin, lifting the hem and soaking it in the strange liquid. Lysara fled. She told no one for weeks. When she finally confessed to a priest, she vanished the next day. Her chambers were found empty, her belongings untouched. The only clue was a torn piece of green velvet left on her pillow. No one spoke of her again. And yet, Eleanor remained beloved by her people. She walked the palace gardens daily, the dress trailing behind her, collecting dirt and leaves never cleaned. Peasants flocked to the gates for a glimpse, hoping to touch even a thread of the hem. Many believed it healed them. Stories spread of the sick rising from their beds after seeing her, of blind children gaining sight. Eleanor never denied the tales. She began to refer to the dress not as mine, but as hers. When asked by a foreign envoy who she meant, she smiled and said, "The Lady of the Leaves, she who weaves and unweaves time." It was clear to all, Eleanor's mind had shifted or perhaps ascended. Court records describe how she spoke less of governance, more of the roots beneath the throne, and the whispering tree. She ordered a massive oak planted in the palace courtyard, its roots growing dangerously close to the foundation. When architects warned of collapse, she dismissed them. "The roots must touch the stone," she said, "or all shall crumble." Still, the realm prospered. Wars were won, harvests were plentiful, and Eleanor, cloaked always in that ancient dress, became more than a queen. She became myth. But not all myths are benign. One evening, during a summer storm, the court awoke to the sound of thunder and a scream. A nobleman, Lord Malloran, had broken into Eleanor's chamber. A longtime critic of her madness, he had decided to strip the dress from her, by force. Guards arrived too late. They found Malloran dead, his eyes wide, lips frozen in terror. Eleanor stood over him, uninjured, the oak leaf on her chest glistening with fresh blood. She said only one word: "He tore." After that night, no one dared approach her without permission. Scholars began to study the dress in secret, poring over ancient texts. They discovered references to a queen of leaves in pre-Christian lore, an earth goddess who wore a garment woven from the first tree, said to grant immortality to its wearer, but at a cost. The soul would slowly fade, replaced by the will of the tree. Was Eleanor becoming this myth? She stopped holding court. Her face, once radiant, grew pale. Her eyes seemed distant, seeing not the present, but something beyond. Servants claimed her voice changed, deeper, almost inhuman, and then came the prophecy. A stoneworker restoring the palace's oldest tower uncovered carvings long buried. In the ancient tongue of Alderwin's first peoples, it read, "The leaf shall bloom, the queen shall fade, the dress shall endure, but not the crown." The meaning was clear. Eleanor's dress would outlive her, but her rule, her lineage, she had no heir. The nobles panicked. Without succession, the realm could fall to chaos. They begged her to wed, to name an heir. She refused. "I have already wed," she said, stroking the dress's worn fabric, "and she shall rule when I'm gone." When pressed, she pointed to the great oak in the courtyard, now towering above the palace, its roots cracking the stone. "Her," she said, "the true queen." Fear gripped Alderwin. A council of nobles plotted to act, to declare her unfit to rule, to take the crown by force. They never got the chance. One morning, Eleanor was found seated beneath the oak, her hands folded, the dress pristine, her eyes closed in peaceful death. No marks, no wounds, only a faint smile. But when they tried to lift her body, it crumbled to dust. The dress remained, whole, untouched, draped over the roots of the oak. They tried to move it, it wouldn't budge. The roots had grown through it, entangled in the fabric. The crown placed beside her was taken, a new king crowned, but the dress remained, on display in the palace garden, guarded, feared, revered. Some say it still moves in the wind, even when the air is still. Some say it waits for another to wear it. Part 4. The dress that would not die. Time erodes even the greatest of empires. Kings fell, thrones changed hands, cities rose and crumbled, but the dress remained. It became legend. The garden where Queen Eleanor crumbled to dust was sealed. No one dared to disturb the dress entwined in the great oak's roots. For decades, it was left untouched, revered as a relic, feared as a curse. Children were told tales of it at night. Behave, or the dress of the Leaf Queen would claim you. Yet time makes fools of all. A century after Eleanor's death, a new ruler, King Theodoric IV, ascended the throne. He was young, ambitious, and impatient with ghosts. He ordered the tree cut down and the dress placed in the royal treasury. It took 30 men 3 days to fell the oak. On the third day, thunder cracked across a cloudless sky. Lightning struck the stump, killing 2 workers. Still, the dress was retrieved, its color unfaded, its fabric as supple as silk. Though 300 years had passed, Theodoric declared it a royal treasure, a symbol of power. He had it mounted on a mannequin of ivory and gold, displayed in the great hall for all to admire. That night, he died. Some said it was poison, others a heart attack. His face was twisted in terror, his hand clutching his chest. Whatever the cause, the dress was locked away again, this time in the royal crypt, behind iron doors. Generations passed. the kingdom fractured into warring provinces. The name Eleanor faded from records, replaced by myths of a leaf queen who ruled the forest, half woman, half tree, but the dress endured. In 1643, a scholar named Bernhard Voss rediscovered it. A polymath and skeptic, he dismissed the legends and petitioned the ruling council for access to the crypt. He was granted 3 days. His journals survive. He described the dress in detail. No seam visible, no thread frayed. The green shimmers like dew on spring grass. The leaf emblem at the chest appears to pulse faintly, though it may be a trick of the eye. On the 3rd night, Voss made a decision he never recorded. He wore the dress. The next morning, guards found the crypt empty. No Voss, no dress, only the leaf emblem resting on the stone floor, stained with fresh blood. The dress reappeared 30 years later in a merchant's caravan in Constantinople. No one could explain how it got there. The merchant, when questioned, claimed he found it in an abandoned monastery in the Carpathian Mountains, draped over a stone altar. He sold it to a wealthy collector, Lord Hanbury of London. In Hanbury's mansion, the dress became a centerpiece. Visitors marveled at it, artists painted it. Some claimed it sang at night, a soft rustling sound like wind through leaves, even in rooms with no windows. Hanbury's wife, Lady Eleanor, named faithfully after the original queen, became obsessed with it. She wore it once at a masked ball. Witnesses described a transformation. Her voice changed, her eyes grew distant. She danced alone, refusing all partners. That night, she locked herself in the garden. By morning, she was gone. The dress lay folded on a bench, untouched by dew. Hanbury burned the garden to the ground. He sealed the dress in a steel vault. He died a year later, mad and raving about roots in the walls and the whisper beneath the floorboards. The vault remained unopened for 200 years. In 1903, British archaeologists excavating the ruins of Alderwin's ancient palace rediscovered the original oak stump. Beneath it, they found human bones, small, delicate, female, and beside them fragments of green fabric. They had found the site of Queen Eleanor's death, or so they thought. Forensic analysis revealed the bones belonged to a woman in her 20s, too young to be Eleanor, who had died in her 60s. Who was she? No one could say. The dress in Hanbury's vault was finally unearthed in 1921 by his great-grandson, who sold it to the British Museum. It went on display in 1923, labeled simply, "The Green Dress, Provenance Unknown." Crowds gathered. Some fainted upon seeing it. One guard reported hearing whispers at night, always in an unfamiliar tongue. The museum removed it from public view after a tourist claimed it spoke to her and tried to throw herself from a balcony. Stored in archives, it disappeared during the Blitz of World War II. Officially, it was lost in bombing. Unofficially, some claimed it was stolen, smuggled out under cover of war. Then, silence. Decades passed, until 1999. In a private collection in Prague, the dress resurfaced. A wealthy collector, name redacted in public records, displayed it during a secret gala. Only a few attendees spoke about it, all under anonymity. They described a woman wearing it. Tall, pale, silent. She did not speak, did not eat. She simply stood near the dress throughout the night. At midnight, she vanished. Her clothes, the dress, everything, gone. Only a single oak leaf remained, placed atop an empty wine glass. Today, the dress is said to reside in a remote monastery in the Alps, guarded by monks who neither confirm nor deny its existence. Visitors are forbidden. Some say it waits, calling out to another queen, another vessel. Others claim it has been worn again, that a woman walks the forests of Europe in a green cloak, never aging, speaking to the trees. What is truth? What is myth? One thing remains certain. The dress, woven of roots soaked in blood, wrapped in centuries of mystery, endures. And somewhere, the spirit of the queen who wore the same dress for 30 years waits to be reborn. Imagine an empress so desperate for eternal youth that she sipped Mercury every morning, believing it kept her flesh ageless and her power absolute. Intrigued? You should be. Part 1. The Liquid Silver Ritual. Born into the gilded palace of the Tsarina of Chaldavia, Empress Anara arrived with prophecy entwined in her bloodline. Astrologers charted a comet over her cradle, claiming its tail shimmered like quicksilver, a portent of a ruler touched by alchemy. Her father, Emperor Mikhail, trained her in court rituals and statecraft, but from early childhood, Anara seemed haunted by age. Younger princes paled, wrinkles formed on her infant face, signs her caregivers whispered with dread. By age 12, she'd overheard palace surgeons extolling Mercury's use in preserving flesh. She tasted its bitter tang, and enchanted by its metal sheen, demanded more. A secret monk alchemist crafted a tincture, mercury suspended in honey and rosewater, dosed daily before breakfast. Her skin supposedly brightened. Court physicians raised eyebrows, but Anara insisted. When Emperor Mikhail died unexpectedly at 49, Anara, now Empress at 17, inherited sovereignty and her mercury regimen. She instituted it as the official palace ritual. Daily distilled mercury with saffron, rose oil, and powdered pearls. She called it the Silver Blessing. Women of the court vied for proximity, hoping to inhale the vapor of her ritual. Servants kept mercury chests locked. Attendants diluted doses in glass phials engraved with imperial sigils. Anara's features stayed porcelain smooth while rivals aged around her. Chroniclers wrote in awe, like a statue of alabaster behind red draperies. She remained vigorous, ruling wars, giving audiences, her skin unwrinkled at 50, apparently untouched by time. Yet alarm festered in the palace. Lips stitched shut after solace? Physicians warned of tremors, swollen gums, hallucinations. Rumors spoke of whispered secrets. Anara practiced tongues speaking unknown languages. She seemed distant, her gaze unfocused as moonlight on mercury pools. Her closest aide, Lady Marisol, kept a hidden ledger, not of statecraft, but of Anara's symptoms. A night entry. Under candle. Tonight, Empress spoke to glass vial as if alive. Children trembled. Another. Hands full of black sores, gums bleeding. She insisted such marks are signs of purification. Meanwhile, her public image intensified. Foreign artists painted her portrait over decades, yet in each successive painting, her face looked identical. Even more unsettling, the mercury chest beneath her bed glowed faintly in candlelight, a soft phosphorescence that rumors called the Silent Heart. Yet no one dared speak. Succession stakes were high. Trade alliances depended on her. Nobles whispered, but soldiers saluted. Merchants modeled perfumes named Silver Youth after her regimen. Pilgrims traveled to witness her eternal beauty, but some fainted, complaining of vertigo. Her rituals continued. Each morning, servants presented kaleidoscope glass bowls of honey rose mercury elixir. She gazed into the polished bowl, a mirror world, then raised it to lips. Observers said her throat resisted the liquid, yet she swallowed, and the mercury dripped down her chin like tears of quicksilver. By her 20th year as Empress, she commanded armies, built marble aqueducts, and quashed revolts, all while drinking mercury. But even the alchemy of power had limits. In this part, the stage is set, an empress entwined with poison, a court captivated and terrified. In part 2, we'll uncover conspiracies among nobles, the first signs of her mind fraying, the scandalous poisoning plot, and whispers of alchemical rituals in hidden chambers. Don't miss it, because what comes next is as toxic as it is mesmerizing. Part 2, The Poisoned Court. Beneath Caldavia's vaulted ceilings and frescoed domes, Empress Anara's empire thrived in spectacle, but rotted at the core. Her visage remained ageless, unmarred, and glistening like marble. But the truth? Inside, her blood thickened, her organs labored under Mercury's weight, and her mind, it began to betray her. It started with dreams, or rather, dreams that seeped into waking hours. Servants described her wandering the palace halls at night, barefoot, trailing silk robes soaked in sweat. She murmured to statues. She called them by names no one recognized, names not of this world. Talon, Moraviel, Arishta, she whispered. Then she would stop, stare into the darkness, and smile. She believed they were spirits born from the Mercury, guardians of her youth. But to the palace physicians, men sworn into silence, it was clear she was slipping. Still, they dared not confront her. To speak against the silver blessing was treason. In council meetings, she began losing time. Minutes passed in silence as she stared at her reflection in goblets of wine. She'd speak in riddles, some poetic, others disturbing. "If I drink the stars, I become the sky," she told foreign emissaries. Nobles forced laughter. Behind closed doors, their fear grew. One man, however, dared more than fear. Duke Salvius, Minister of Trade. A pragmatic man known for his icy demeanor, he'd grown tired of Anara's rituals stalling court decisions. He believed her obsession endangered the realm. Whispers of famine, foreign unrest, and civil disorder. None received her attention. Instead, she poured fortune into alchemists searching for the perfect elixir. Mercury refined through 7 distillations, rumored to halt death itself. Salvius gathered allies. Secret meetings in wine cellars birthed the Ivory Conspiracy. Their aim? End the Empress's reign, not by force, but by persuasion and poison. A plan formed. They would replace her Mercury with a placebo, a mixture of silver leaf and water. They believed, perhaps naively, that if her ritual faltered, her grip on power would too. But they underestimated her addiction. The swap took place during the winter solstice festival, when feasts distracted even the most vigilant eyes. Salvius's agent, a physician named Callian, executed the switch. For 7 days, Anara consumed the imitation, and for 7 days, she grew agitated. Her skin dulled, her eyes lost that metallic glint. She demanded to see her Mercury chest. The locks had been replaced, the keys gone. She raged. "Where is my blessing?" she screamed, tearing silk curtains from the windows. "I hear them whispering. Talon is silent. Moravia won't speak." Callian was caught. Tortured, he confessed to the swap and the conspirators behind it. Anara summoned Salvius and his co-conspirators to the Hall of Mirrors. There, in front of nobles and priests, she delivered a speech seared into Chaldavian history. "You would strip me of youth, of the sacred bond I share with the stars? Then let me show you the price of treason." She ordered the original Mercury file retrieved. Before all eyes, she drank deeply, more than ever before. Her hands trembled, her mouth foamed, her veins turned dark beneath pale skin. Yet she stood. Salvius and the others expected her to collapse. Instead, she laughed, a chilling, inhuman sound. "I am more than mortal," she said. "Mercury is my blood now." As punishment, she sentenced the conspirators to death, not by sword or noose, but by Mercury. They were forced to drink it, drop by drop. One by one, they fell, convulsing, screaming, and then silent. From that day, she ordered her alchemists to refine the elixir further. Her doses doubled, her fingers blackened at the tips, her teeth loosened. But her beauty? It remained, in portraits, in legends. Still, something shifted. She rarely left her chambers. She kept mirrors covered, fearing what they might show. Her voice grew soft, then hoarse, then nearly silent. The court called her the silent Empress, and feared her more than ever. But behind the walls of her gilded prison, Anara began crafting a new dream. Immortality not just of youth, but of soul. She believed Mercury was not just for the body. It could carry her essence beyond death. Part 3. The Alchemical Afterlife. After the public execution of the conspirators, Empress Anara withdrew further from the world. Yet her influence only deepened. The people of Chaldavia whispered that she had transcended mortality. In taverns and temples, they spoke her name with reverence or dread, never both. They called her the Empress of Silver Blood, she who cannot die. Within the obsidian walls of her palace, Anara's obsession with Mercury, no longer merely a fountain of youth, turned to something far more audacious, apotheosis. She would not only cheat death but conquer it, returning reborn, immortal not in body alone, but in spirit, in divinity. Her alchemists, those few who had not perished in prior failures, were ordered to abandon all known sciences and embark upon what she called the Great Work. The aim? Create an elixir that would preserve the soul within Mercury's eternal, unchanging flow. To her, Mercury was not poison. It was the prima materia, the first matter from which all life sprang, and through which her soul would never fade. These were not idle dreams. Anara established what she named the Sanctum Argentum, the silver sanctum, deep beneath the palace. This hidden complex of chambers, laboratories, and crypts became a forbidden domain. Only she and her most trusted alchemists entered. Servants who dared cross its threshold were never seen again. Inside, rituals began. Nightly chants echoed from beneath the floors. Strange lights flickered through the cracks of stone. The air grew thick with fumes, sweet, metallic, suffocating. The palace above began to decay. Tapestries grew damp and mold-ridden. Gardens wilted, fountains ran dry. But Inara cared only for what lay below. She believed Mercury could hold not only youth, but memory. She ordered her alchemists to preserve her blood, hair, skin, all submerged in mercury phials, sealed with gold and wax. Her most daring experiment was yet to come, the transference of consciousness into a vessel. And so began the Vessel Project. She commissioned statues carved in her likeness, life-sized, adorned with gold, veins of silver, and hollow interiors. Into these she poured mercury, believing it would carry her soul from her flesh into eternal form. Her alchemists performed rituals, pouring mercury over her skin, chanting invocations of forgotten gods. But each attempt failed. The statues cracked. Mercury leaked. One by one, her alchemists died. Some poisoned, others driven mad. One, it is said, gouged out his own eyes, screaming that he saw the silver sun inside her. Inara was undeterred. Her health, meanwhile, deteriorated. Though her face appeared youthful, her body weakened. Her limbs trembled. Her eyes, once sharp, became clouded. Her mind wandered. She spoke often to shadows, claiming they were her future selves, already ascended, watching over her. Her final plan was known only to a few. The construction of a tomb, the Argent Vault, hidden in the cliffs outside the city. Not a tomb for death, but a chrysalis for rebirth. There, she ordered a chamber lined with mirrors, filled with mercury pools. At its center, her ultimate vessel, a statue taller than any before, inlaid with thousands of gems, veins crafted from living silver. In secret, she prepared for the passing. She would drink the final elixir, now a thick, silvery liquid, so potent it glowed in darkness. Then she would enter the vessel. Her body would perish, but her soul, it would live forever within the mercury. The court grew restless. Rumors spread. Some said the Empress was already dead. Others claimed she was preparing to become a goddess. The high priest demanded to see her, but he vanished the next day. Then, on the first day of the harvest moon, the palace bells rang. The Empress had vanished. No body was found. Her chambers were sealed. Her throne remained empty. A decree was issued by her remaining ministers. The Empress has ascended. She walks among the stars, and her will shall reign eternal. The people were stunned. Some believed the lie. Others feared the truth, that her madness had consumed her, or that her soul lingered still, within the mercury. Part 4. The Eternal Empress. Centuries passed. Chaldavia, once a kingdom of obsidian and silver, was conquered, rebuilt, and renamed. The palace of Empress Inara crumbled. The tapestries turned to dust. The silver spires were plundered and melted down. But the people never forgot her. Legends swirled. Some said her ghost haunted the ruins, draped in robes of liquid metal, her eyes glowing with silver fire. Others claimed to have seen her walking beneath the full moon, unaged, her feet leaving no prints in the soil. No one knew the truth, until the discovery. It was a band of treasure hunters who uncovered the entrance to the Argent Vault, hidden behind a landslide of stone and overgrown vines. Deep in the cliffs, they found a sealed door, a circle of black iron inscribed with the symbol of Mercury. Mercury. It took days to open. Behind it lay a stairwell, descending into darkness. They descended into the abyss. Torches flickered. The air was heavy, thick with a metallic scent. As they moved deeper, they found walls lined with ancient mirrors, cracked, tarnished, yet still reflecting twisted images. Pools of mercury dotted the floor, undisturbed, shimmering in the dark. And then they found it. At the heart of the vault stood the vessel, the final statue of Empress Inara, towering, magnificent, horrifying. Her likeness was perfect, eyes inlaid with moonstone, skin of gold-veined silver, her crown a circlet of iron and rubies. But the most unsettling feature was her face. serene, almost alive. Inside the vessel, Mercury flowed. It pulsed, softly, rhythmically, as if breathing, and beneath the statue a sarcophagus. They opened it. Within lay the preserved body of Empress Inara, her skin pale, her hair dark as night, her lips tinted silver. Her veins shimmered faintly beneath the skin coursing with mercury. Though dead, she looked merely asleep. One of the treasure hunters reached out, touched her hand, and screamed. His skin turned pale, his veins blackened, he fell, convulsing. The others fled in terror, leaving everything behind. Word of the vault spread. Scholars came, priests came, soldiers came, and all who touched the Empress were cursed. A new cult formed, the Order of the Argent Veil. They believed Empress Inara had achieved godhood, that she lived within the Mercury, her soul bound to the metal, awaiting the time of her return. They guarded the vault, performed rites, and offered tributes, blood, silver, and whispered prayers. In time, they claimed she could speak, through visions, through the Mercury, that she offered knowledge, power, and eternal youth to those who served her. But all who drank from the Mercury pools died. Still, the cult grew. In the modern day, the ruins remain forbidden. Governments deny the existence of the vault. The site is buried, concealed, yet rumors persist of strange lights, of figures in silver robes, of a woman's voice echoing in the dark. And the Mercury still flows. Historians debate her fate. Was she mad or brilliant? Did she poison herself or ascend? Was she a tyrant or a visionary? What is certain is this: Empress Inara, the silver-blooded, carved her legacy into history with ambition, ruthlessness, and a dream of immortality. She drank mercury to preserve her youth, but in the end she preserved something far more potent: fear, because some say she is still watching, waiting, and when the silver moon rises, you may hear her voice whisper from the darkness, "I am eternal."